Commissioner Bennick, Commissioner Hoyler,
Here.
Commissioner Keating,
Here.
Commissioner Purvey,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Vice Chair Chapman,
Here.
Chair Summers.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
of the United States of America, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any current events? Pardon me.
Sorry, Chairman, none at this time.
No? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the consideration and action on the March 5th, 2015 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and included exhibits. And I had a change on that I'd like to make on page 3 on the IRIS project. At the very bottom of that item, it says citywide groundbreaking ceremony and grand opening ceremony. And I think it should read, Chairman suggested having groundbreaking and grand opening ceremonies for projects like this. And I'm referring to the IRIS project. So if we could include that and then have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Please vote.
Motion passes, 6 yes votes, 1 absence.
Thank you. Next item is consideration and action regarding a major site plan for Texas Roadhouse Restaurant located on the southwest side of Grand Avenue, southeast of Park View Place, within the Park Place PAD. Could we have the staff report, please?
Excuse me. Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. Yes, this is the major site plan for the Texas Roadhouse Restaurant, the location you just noted. It's in the Park Place PAD. And zooming in on the property a little bit, you can see that it's pretty much surrounded by commercial uses in that area. And if I fade back the mapping a little bit, you can see the context of the property. And the Texas Roadhouse is proposing basically a 7,000 square foot restaurant, single family restaurant, on what is a vacant parcel within that larger plat, that larger development. And you'll see the building is located in that lower left-hand corner, parking field to the right and to the top. There is an access issue, which was in your staff report and has to do, it's up in that upper left-hand corner, but I'd like to circle back on that if I could. And then this would be the landscape plan as initially proposed. The elevations on the project is typical of what you might see in a Texas Roadhouse restaurant. I would say that the applicant has been very amenable to working with us to create, visual interest. The original elevations that came in had a brick wainscot, and we asked them if they would be willing to put on a faux stone that would be more in line with the development that's out there, and they said sure, we will do that. And then we asked if they could do some other, for instance. On some of the elevations, there were some large expanses of wall plane, and they were amenable to adding windows, faux windows, and even bringing their roof plane across to break up that mass and so forth. And so they were very amenable to working with us, and they were very grateful for that. The signage on the site, Texas Roadhouse, basically a channel letter with a neon tubing in the inside, covered with a clear plexiglass is basically what we're looking at. So this is what would be facing Grand Avenue, and then this would be at the front entrance towards the parking lot. And then coming around the corner to the opposite of Grand Avenue, same kind of sign facing the larger parking area. And then this would be the side facing the Outback restaurant. Mentioned earlier about this cross-access issue. If I drill in a little bit tighter, you can see that there's existing curb cuts already there. And it would seem that the access issue had been thought through, but apparently there's no evidence. The cross-access wasn't established during the original platting of the subdivision, and instead it's implemented through a series of agreements. So this landowner has an agreement with this landowner, and then this person sells, and so it winds up with this kind of convoluted contractual arrangement that somehow omitted this problem right here. So we don't want to facilitate what would wind up being a trespass, and so what we wrote the stipulations of approval that if Texas Roadhouse couldn't work out an easement with Outback, that they would give us a revised site plan, or they would just block that area off. And so our stipulations of approval have that in mind. And then we received an email a couple of days ago and from Texas Roadhouse, and they said that they have exhausted all remedies trying to get this easement lined up, and they were not successful for whatever reason. And so they gave us a set of revised plans. Now this plan right here that you see is the plan that you had in your initial packet. This is the plan that I showed you previously. And this, if you can see the difference between the two, this is the plan as currently proposed, which is in your handouts tonight. And if I compare them side by side, here's the cross-access as in your packet. This would be how it would work right now. What they're doing is putting in basically what we'd call a ditch lane. So rather than having a dead-end parking lot, which everybody is going to hate, there's an opportunity for people to just circle right around and come out on that northwest side of the building and get out of the parking lot in a forward movement of the vehicle. So we've passed that by, the various people. We talked to Fire Chief Espy this morning, and though it's not a perfect solution, it's acceptable, and we think that this is going to be probably the solution that's going to work. And of course, by blocking that access, it also affects Outback. So they're not going to be able to have access onto that property either. So that's the way it goes. Here are the two landscape plans. Again, set side by side, same sort of thing, but it may be a little bit clearer, easier to understand. So with that, I have nothing further to add. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Commissioner Prevey.
Yes. Is there any further discussions going to occur between Texas Roadhouse and Outback as far as, or is that a closed discussion for now and a foreseeable future?
Are you asking about the character of that discussion?
No, as far as the access, I mean, is this a final done deal?
The information that we got from the person representing Texas Roadhouse was that they had been in contact with Outback and that they had exhausted all remedies and it wasn't going to work out. So I have no idea what that conversation entailed, and
Okay.
So.
There's other properties below the Texas Roadhouse. Is there any problems with those properties, or?
It does not appear that there are problems. It seems like all that cross-access seems to be intact. It's just this strange situation right here.
So it's not something that it's going to get perpetuated as other developments go in that area?
It would not appear that way.
Okay, Thank you.
And I would add too, it's interesting, if you notice on the image on the right, you notice there's a series of trees right in through here, but right where the driveway or this cross access is located, they're only proposing bushes, which would suggest to me that they're hopeful that at some point in time they'll get that cross access, and then they'll be able to knock that out without killing trees.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
One other,
Oh, more?
yeah, just one other question, as far as landscaping go, if there's some accuracy to it, the 2 trees where you're showing the path, the turn in the path down there, I don't think you can put any fire apparatus down there if that's the way the trees are gonna grow.
Again, I spoke to Chief Espy earlier today, and he had both of the drawings, and he didn't, he said, like, again, it's not the perfect solution, but he could live with it.
No, but as far as that one tree that's on the island, right there, on your revised plan, where you show the turn arrow, if your trees are gonna be where they're gonna grow together,
Right here?
right in there, you're basically gonna have a problem in the future as far as fire apparatus goes.
That may be. There's a requirement in the zoning that you have a certain amount of trees per number of parking spaces, and that works out, but if it needs to come out, I'll leave that to you.
At least I'd like to see it revisited, make sure that it's specifically that's what the chief is agreeing to versus just.
We'll make sure.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, one question. Did the parking number of spaces change between the current and the revised, where they put in this road? Was there a difference now in number of spaces?
Yes, there was a difference. And in fact, I actually caught it right here. The original had 82 on-site, 21 off-site through shared parking agreement. With the ditch lane, it drops to 82 on-site and 23 off-site.
So it
Works out.
103 and 103. Okay, no other questions?
Mr. Campbell?
I'm looking at is it next to Trader Joe's? Is that the south portion of this, or?
It's in that area, right?
Okay. Notice the entrances to, the only entrances to this project is, they're close together, basically. I assume that the fire marshal has approved this, but it seems a little unusual. Kind of caught me off guard a little bit when we changed the plan or revised it, because I had no questions. Now I have a question. That there's a circulation and people apparently can exit over on the north side, but it seems cumbersome. I really have them pursue and try to get that access. I think it's important for safety, and I think it would be beneficial to both of them, both parties here. But I think it's a great project, and it looks like something that really benefit our city. So I have no other questions.
Mr. O'Haira?
No questions.
Mr. Keating?
No, my questions were already answered.
I had a question. Were you going to ask a question? I didn't hear that. Oh, no questions. Okay. Okay, thank you. I had a question about signage. The main sign facing the Grand Avenue at 29 feet seemed large to me, and I just wanted to hear from you whether the sign program that they have meets code. I'm assuming it does, but I'd like to hear it.
It does. It's been a while since I reviewed it, but we did review the sign package against the requirements, and it does meet the requirements.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Could we have a motion, please?
I have a motion. I move to approve a major site plan for Texas Roadhouse Restaurant, subject to staff's recommended stipulations, stipulation A as listed in the staff report.
A second.
Please vote. My list disappeared and I'm doing it faking it. So.
Motion passes, 6 yes votes.
Thank you. The next item is consideration and action on a zone text amendment regarding the regulation of donation bins within the city of Surprise.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm here for determination of the donation bin regulations. We did discuss this at the last meeting, and I do have that whole other PowerPoint, a lot of pictures, so I limited it. I have access to the pictures on this PowerPoint, but I'm just going to point out some of the changes that we incorporated. We did incorporate, as you saw, some of the changes in the language a little bit here and there, but administrative changes that have happened since you got your copy include the locations clarified, which allows donation bins in industrial public facilities, zoning districts, and then places in residential and places of assembly and other public facilities located in residential zoning districts. And that is, as you know, you have 3 copies because there is this, little known to me, there was more of a controversy to the subject than I knew about. So we have those 3 versions. And then there was a little bit of a error in the donation bin removal language. And this also gives the owner or authorized agent the authority to revoke the permit and remove the bin. And with this workshop, you'll be recommending to the mayor and council for their workshop. And I have the rest of the slides here if you need to see any of those. And I know we have a couple people that want to discuss this. And I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you. What? Yeah, actually, I think we would have the public hearing part of it first, so we can get the input from them, and if staff could call the names.
Robbie Milner.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Robbie Milner. I reside in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm here this evening representing American Textile Recycling Service. We are one of the operators of the recycling service in Arizona and around the country. First of all, I'd like to start out by saying that we fully support the implementation of an ordinance, and we have no objections to the ordinance, other than a few points that I would like to mention as far as the ordinance is concerned. The first area of concern is that it states here that the property owner should have the authority to give permission for the bins to be placed on their property. We would like to include authorized agent in that language. The reason being is that many of these properties are owned by pension funds, conglomerates, as well as or big insurance companies, and there's no set defined individual owner that can in fact sign that authorization. That has in fact been recognized in the language of the ordinance. If you have a look at the very next point, and in fact the point that was brought up by the gentleman that spoke before me, is that it is asking that not only does the owner but also the authorized agent have permission to rescind the permit. All we're asking is that if the authorized agent has the authority to rescind it, that they also have the authority to grant permission. In fact, many of these properties are solely and wholly managed by an authorized agent, and they do all the leasing, the letting, the management, the signage, the maintenance. So we're just asking that we be subject to the same rules and regulations as the rest of the tenants and the rest of the maintenance of the property. The other point that I would like to bring up is that the ordinance calls for a number to be painted on the bin, which is the number of the permit. I'd like to point out that this is highly impractical. Due to the weather conditions and the way that these bins are manufactured, in order to paint anything on the bins, they have to be sandblasted and powder coated. You cannot just simply go and paint a number or paint something onto the bins. Because of the weather and the extreme conditions out here, and the cost of that is $440 per bin. If you the paint that we use on our bins is resistant to any kind of graffiti or any kind of spray paint, which can easily be wiped off and cleaned off with any kind of a cleaning agent. And therefore, to go and paint a number on the bin over and above the bin would not be practical, because it would not last more than 3 to 5 months and can be easily wiped off. What we are recommending is that it be treated as the normal signage, as do all the ordinances around the valley, and whereby we in fact have decals or signage made which gets put onto those bins. The signage is made in a manner which is UV resistant, which is resistant to being removed, and which can be easily placed onto the bin, which would, it is a little bit not as expensive. It's a lot more expensive than just painting it on, but it's certainly not as expensive as every year if you changed the permit number, as the ordinance requires that the permits be renewed every year. I assume that a new permit number would be issued. It means that we would have to take the bin in, and we would have to have the whole bin sandblasted and powder coated at an expense of $440 per bin. So it's highly impractical to do that. So we would like to ask that that be changed. There's also language in the ordinance pertaining to the removal of the bins by the city. And it says that if there's any violation or otherwise of the ordinance, that the city would have the authority to remove the bins. We are fully in agreement with that. However, we would like there to be some kind of a process involved whereby we could rectify the violation. So if the ordinance number wasn't on the bin, or if the bin wasn't in the correct parking spot, or whatever the reason is that we would be notified and given some kind of a grace period in order to be able to rectify the violation before the city removes it. On all of our bins, we have a 24-hour number which is manned. It is not an answering service, so it goes through to a direct person, and we respond within 2 hours to those calls. So it's not that we are unavailable, and the ordinance also does call for a number to be on the bin, which we would comply with. The last point that I would like to bring up, and I'm not sure, I didn't see any language in here, is that once the ordinance has been brought into practice, we would just like there to be a grace period for us to become compliant. We'd like to recommend a 3-month grace period, which would allow us to get all of our paperwork in place, get all of the necessary signatures, and to allow the city to process the applications. Further than that, I don't know if there's any questions or anybody has any questions for me. But other than that, other than those few changes, I'd just like to reiterate that we are fully supportive of the ordinance.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on our list?
Yes. Benjamin Graff.
Good evening, Chairman Summers, members of the Commission. My name is Benjamin Graff with Withey Morris, 2525 East Arizona Biltmore Circle in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you again for your time tonight, for doing a workshop firsthand, and tonight taking action on this item. In part, my presentation tonight is very short. I'm very pleased with the direction that staff has taken this, with the comments and discussion of the Commission at the last hearing. The one point I really do want to drive home tonight is I hope you can see in the different versions before you that there's a significant difference between something that's only in policy and something that's going to be physically written into this ordinance tonight. And the latter is stronger. The latter is something that 50 years from now, you can be assured that the ordinance will still adhere and require drop boxes to be a good use in the city of Surprise. So specifically, tonight, I'm here testifying that we are in full support of version B that the city staff has provided to you, namely because version B, as you can see in paragraph 9, has required not only written authorization, but notarized written authorization from the property owner. And as you know from my testimony at the last hearing, this is a key point. This is a key reason to make sure that a property owner never walks into the city of Surprise to find a forged document with their name on it authorizing a bin on the property. So notarization, which is true, you already require in policy, needs tonight to be forwarded as a part of the ordinance, and that's very key. We're very happy with version number B because it also allows for the property owner to control the permit. And in paragraph 16, it makes it very clear that both the city and the property owner have the authorization to remove the bin. We want this to be a document that allows you to partner with your retail and commercial property owners so that they can come to the city and know that they have an ordinance that protects them as well. So in terms of the ordinances, in terms of what we've seen, this is an excellent version that I hope you do put full support and a motion to approve before tonight. Just to respond to a couple comments that were received just now in testimony, it's fine if an authorized agent authorizes a bin, but please keep in mind an authorized agent must have the authority to sign a temporary use permit application. And that's a very different thing from just a general authorized agent who may only deal with leasing or tenant matters. So please keep that in mind tonight. If an authorized agent does sign, they need to be someone who's authorized by the owner to sign a land use application. Ideally, the same type of person that could sign a rezoning application. In terms of the painted number, frankly, that's one of the things that makes your ordinance stronger than any ordinance we've seen across the valley. Right now, the city of Phoenix is struggling because they cannot identify which bins are and are not authorized by a permit. I think the idea of a painted number is excellent, and it solves that problem from the get-go. I think there's some other creative solutions as well. And in terms of a process to remove bins, that's already taken care of through your neighborhood services and enforcement officials. Any violation would first receive a notice of violation well before a citation or actual removal, so I don't see any problems with that at all. So I will end my comments there. Again, version B looks absolutely excellent. It embodies what we think of as a very strong ordinance to regulate the use of drop boxes. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Mapstead.
Chairman Summers, members of the commission, my name is Jim Mapstead, 8837 North Central in Phoenix, Arizona, and I represent an organization called Stop Donation Bin Blight. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak again tonight. I appreciate your time last month as well on behalf of my organization, and I express my support for the City of Surprise's proposed regulation of these donation drop boxes. Version B actually is the best one before you, we believe. As a past City of Phoenix Planning Commissioner, I worked closely with Phoenix on its donation bin ordinance, which in particular included language notarized written authorization as required from the property owner or authorized agent for each drop box. And that's again why I support option B before you. I believe notarization should be explicitly included in ordinance in that it provides certainty to city staff that no exceptions can be made going forward. Given the drop box industry's history of trespass and unauthorized placement of boxes on property without ownership authorization, notarization is an appropriate requirement within the ordinance to ensure drop box operators must take an additional step to verify a property owner's signature and authorization. I believe including notarization in the Surprise text amendment will both empower the Surprise Code Enforcement Department and provide property owners with the means to preserve their property rights. And with all due respect to Mr. Milner, paint has come a long way. It's difficult for me to imagine the reality of the situation of somebody trying to take graffiti removal and to remove paint on a donation bin box when there are so many other opportunities for somebody to do that. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I have no further comments.
Anybody else, anybody else wishing to speak on this issue? Seems like that it. Thank you. Mr. Chapman.
Yes, I have a question. On We received a couple of revised versions of the ones that we have read, and I've kind of narrowed my own thinking down to number B also here. I know it's a popular one, it seems to be. But one of the sections under section 9 of B, it says the entity placing the bin shall submit to the city notarized written permission by the property owner. If we could add or authorized agent there also, I would recommend that, and then keeping the language, well, in fact, well, they're both 9, so the not just for the submission to the city for getting the bin, but also for using authorization to be able to also have the rescind the authorization. And it's just that point that I'd like to make for both the submission and the removal part, if that's necessary.
Chair, Mr. Chapman, would that be any different than version C, which does have the does include the authorized agent?
In the written part of number C, number 9 does not have authorized agent in it. It has the bin shall be submitted to the city, written permission for the property owner, or excuse me. Excuse me, that's correct. Yes.
So the C.
So C is actually more favorable in my opinion. Excuse me.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Or
I have no
comments?
other questions.
Okay. Mr. Hoyland?
One thing we've heard a lot about is the notarization versus policy versus ordinance. Can you explain to me why we can't make it as an ordinance over a policy so it has teeth?
That, Chairman, Commissioner, that gives the city a little bit of flexibility depending on what happens. If we were to take that and put it into out of policy, there is no room to, if any situation would come forward where we wouldn't require that anymore.
Okay. The other thing I had, trying to read through this, we had talked about it at the last meeting, but also in an email that I sent regarding public schools, churches that have their own drop boxes for their own personal use, and they would be exempt from the temporary use permit on that. Did that get placed in here in any section?
No. Staff did discuss this, and we included the thing for places of assembly, which would include churches and schools, but there might be a little bit of issue of allowing one group free reign as opposed to another group.
Okay. That's all I have.
Katie.
Yes, I have actually just more of a comment than a question directed at the commission. Just want to make sure that we're clear about what we're voting on, the different versions here. So version B has notarized in the language, but it does not have authorized agent. Whereas version C has authorized agent, but it does not have the notarized version in the text. And am I correct?
Chair, yes, sir, you are correct, but that still falls under our current policy that all temporary use permits require a notarized signature.
Oh, okay. So if the commission wanted to include the notarized portion of things and wanted the authorized agent, then version C would accomplish that?
That would not put the owner authorization language in the code to have that, but it would still rely on policy, while C or B would put that in, that portion in. I'm not sure if I...
Yeah, so B would put it in, but as at least a couple members of the commission have intimated is that, it doesn't have the authorized agent wording in there.
That is correct. Version B does not have the owner, the agent, except for in the situation of removal and
Right,
revocation.
except for just for removal, not the placing of the bin. Okay, I want to make sure I was clear on that, and I hope the rest of the commission was clear on that also.
I would like a little further explanation there. Version C requires notarization. It's specific in the language. Am I correct on that? I don't have it in front of me right now. For owner and agent?
Owner or agent, yes, sir.
Okay. And version?
Yeah. For the submission, it doesn't. The submission doesn't have authorization.
Okay.
If I may, I'd like to summarize those.
Yeah, okay, yes, if you could, that would be
and version A is more of what the staff would be most in favor of, and that is to keep the owner authorization as a policy, and the temporary use permits would just be as that, no more authorization. B includes in the language the owner authorization. C does owner authorization or agent.
Okay. And all three of those in your framework of the use permit requires a notarized signature, whether it be the agent or the property owner. Is that correct?
At this time, yeah, we require by our policy owner authorization.
Okay.
No.
I have one question. In none of the versions A, B, or C, all of them says the property owner will control the temporary use permit, and the owner and the authorized agent may rescind, but it does not say the authorized agent may authorize the temporary use permit. Is that correct?
Commissioner, no. That would be, what you're describing would be version C, which would allow the owner or authorized agent to submit the TUP.
But it says here the property owner will control the temporary use permit. As such, the owner or authorized agent may rescind their authorization, but it doesn't say that the authorized agent may grant the. You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
It's just the wording. So it says the owner and authorized agent may rescind their authorization, but it doesn't say that the authorized agent has the ability to authorize it. It says the property owner will control it.
What C does is allow only the, or C allows, if I may, and I'm just going to run down to that section. The entity, and this is in C, the entity placing the bin shall submit to the city written permission of the property owner or authorized agent consenting to the placement and maintenance of the donation bin.
Okay, that answers my question.
I think
Thank
the
you.
question I had there, it doesn't say that it's a notarized.
That's
For the
correct, and I think
submission.
what Bart was saying is that in this version, it doesn't say it in the language of this document, but it's their policy that they would still have it notarized, and that's the difference, I think, that we're having a hard time grasping.
Is there some complication that it couldn't be placed in there? I mean, to clarify it for the average person on the street?
Absolutely. As per your direction, I could, to clarify that when we go to the city council workshop.
Yeah, I think we
More questions? Mr. Harder.
Yeah, I mean, back to the notarization thing. I mean, granted, it falls under general policy about the notarization, but I mean, whether we're looking at A, B, C, D, these very different, or these various forms, I think even C should have, if that is taken or chosen, it should have notarization in that as well. It's forcing property management companies, the authorized agents to do that when looking at the code itself. I understand general policy. Some people may oversee it, some people not completely understand it. But when they're looking directly at this bin and they see notarized, I'm just saying on the off chance someone doesn't really have the authorized, they're not really authorized to do that. Are they really going to go have it notarized and start breaking laws? I mean, right off the bat. So, it's just one of those things where words are pretty powerful. That's it.
Noted.
Oh, go ahead.
Noted, yes.
Yeah, same thing, the B version, at least that's what I've been looking at, and every place where you talk about the owner, I would suggest maybe look at, see the idea of putting authorized agent
Doesn't have the agent
language
list
in
here.
there, so.
Could you speak up a little bit, please? Speak louder, please.
Speak louder? Boy, nobody's ever told me that before.
I can't hear
Okay. Again, with version B, I think two things. Number one, notarized should be in the language, period. I don't think it's a general policy. I think it needs to be there. Secondly, if we're talking about owner authorizing it, it should also have in there basically authorized agent, being able to authorize. And then my only question to our esteemed legal expert is there any ambiguity to authorized agent?
Chairman, members of the commission, I don't think so. I think that's a pretty common statement. And if you're requiring the authorized agent to have notarized permission from the owner, I think you're covered.
Okay. So those are my suggestions, or at least something to think about.
Mr. Smith.
The only question I have, I guess, is to the city attorney is the difference in policy and code. What is the benefits to the city and to have it in policy versus code?
Chairman, members of the commission, the putting it in policy just gives the city staff the ability to adjust to changing conditions. It gives a little bit more flexibility. If you put it in the code, that is what we'll do every time, and there's no wavering to react to changing conditions. We're happy to do whatever's your preference.
And Chair, members of the commission, if I may, and what I'm hearing is, and I apologize if the versions confuse you, this was a confusing subject, but what I'm hearing is on C, the only version, or the only change on there would be the notarization, whether it be authorization or owner.
You gotta have that.
Mr. Keating.
Well, I can see Mr. Graff definitely has more to say about this subject, and I'd actually like to hear what he has to say, because I think he's probably, as an attorney, probably picked through this a lot more carefully than we have.
Thank you, Chairman Summers, Commissioner Keating. Just from what I've observed, if I could just be so bold as to summarize what I think I'm hearing, it sounds like a motion to approve version B with the addition of the authorized agent to paragraph 9 would meet all of the needs here, because it sounds from those who've spoken that notarization is important to be in the code, but then your motion to approve version B could then incorporate that authorized agent language, which we are perfectly fine with as well.
My question to you would be, have you noticed anything then different in version B and C other than the language of the notarized and the authorized agent?
Absolutely. Very important point, and why I wouldn't be in favor of just a motion to approve C with notarization is if you look at paragraph 16 in versions B and C, you'll see that the ordinance authorizes in version B the city and property owner to remove and dispose of a donation bin in violation of the ordinance. That is key. Remember, one of the important things I believe you're doing today is partnering and standing up for your local property owners and allowing them to hold this ordinance up and say, I have the right to remove a bin that's in violation. So that's a key element of version B that we would not want to lose tonight, which is again why I motion to approve B, incorporating the authorized agent into paragraph 9 would be, I think, the ideal blend of what I'm hearing from the commission tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for the additional time. Really appreciate it.
Any more comments?
Do we need to take a, do we need to
Mr.
take a
Chapman.
vote? I was wondering, Mr. Chair, if we need to take, suggest an amendment to version number B, number 9, to add authorized agent right past where it says permission of the property owner and or authorized agent. Or, and I'd suggest if I'd like to make a motion to amend that wording.
Then that includes notarization in that statement, right?
It does.
Okay. Could we, yeah, before you make that motion, I would like to bring up a couple other issues, or maybe we vote just on this part and then amend it. I'm not sure what we should probably.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be more clear if we get all of the changes together and put it into one motion.
Okay, let me go back to this. There's a couple things that were on our list from last time that that didn't get on there, and one of them is a statement on the bin indicating approximate percentage of donation going to a nonprofit organization, and there's some language that staff developed that said each donation bin shall be clearly marked to identify if the donation items are to be for a charitable purpose and what portion of the proceeds are to be used for charitable purposes. The information will be applied to the bin with contrasting paint. The information shall be a minimum of, and I'm thinking, a ½ inch high, and located on the deposit face of the donation bin. I don't know whether anybody has any thoughts about including whether, and basically it's saying, are these items for a nonprofit entity versus a profit entity? And and I've realized there's a combination, can be a combination of both, but what percentage goes to a nonprofit entity at the end of the day? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Is there a state statute? I thought last time at the meeting there's a state statute that they have to identify that it is a nonprofit or a for-profit bin. I don't think in the statute it says that they have to designate what percent. Is that correct?
Actually, I'm going to bring Mr. Graff up because he knows that answer.
There is a state statute, I apologize, I don't have the citation off the top of my head, but it was the Truth and Charitable Giving Act passed by the state legislature some time back. It does require, under state law, for bins to identify whether they are for-profit and nonprofit. It does not necessarily get into the specifics of percentages. And frankly, if I may be so blunt, it has not been enforced. So you have an opportunity before you as a city to enforce what you want to enforce in your jurisdiction. But to the question of that, it's enforceable by the Attorney General's office, and we don't know of any prosecutions or procedures under that act as of today.
I think it would be beneficial for the city to have something like that on the bins, not rely on the state to enforce that, and that would give the users an idea of where it's going, or what percentage of the proceeds would be going to a charitable organization. And they should know pretty well what percentage it is. If they're for profit and the part goes to a charity, somebody's writing the check. So
correct.
I would like to add that provision if we could.
I'd like to just support that comment to know that when people donate something, they would like to know for what they're donating for. And sometimes with just whether it's profit or nonprofit, may not address what is actually going to the charitable or the profit-making entity. So I'd support the idea of having that on a bin.
I have a,
Mr. Harder.
it doesn't it, if it's already state law that they're required to do that and our ordinance is following state law, we wouldn't necessarily have to write anything into our ordinance to cover that because it's already covered under the state, correct?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that's correct. Although I just tried to do a quick check on that act, and I can't get Wi-Fi in this room. So, so I wasn't able to confirm that particular statute, but you're right. To the extent that it exists already, we don't have to do it again. A state law is in effect in each city. Now, we can certainly go beyond the requirements of state law if that's the pleasure of the commission.
Yeah,
I mean, it's, my only thing is, I mean, I understand putting that in there. Does code enforcement have anything to say?
Chairman Summers, members of the commission, I think we should be very careful about what we're going to put on in an ordinance regarding what's going to be on the bins, because are we then going to be asked to try to enforce the validity of that statement? Because that would be a very difficult task for us. Our primary job is to enforce land use ordinances and property maintenance standards, not whether an organization may or may not be at a certain charitable level or not. That would be we really would not have the resources to be able to verify that. If you're just looking for whether that statement is on the bin, we could certainly verify that. We would not be able to, we would be very challenged to verify the validity of the statement.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. My only thing is, I think it would put a little bit more undue work if we do write it in as an ordinance, and for some unforeseen circumstance, someone does put false information on that. Is there now liability upon code enforcement because whoever's putting these bins out is putting false information on these things? And if we put it in there, it's code enforcement's responsibility now to write all of this. I don't know if it's accurate, to write all of this information down, and someone has to verify that information. So are we making more work for code enforcement when they're supposed to be, when they're required to follow state law? And I'm not an attorney, but the state law supersedes local jurisdiction.
Chairman, members of the commission, how it works is state law is enforceable in the city, but we can go over and above. We can't be more restrictive.
Okay. Thank you.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, whether we have an ordinance concerning whether we put nonprofit or profit on the bins, code still would be responsible for enforcing the state law, which states that it must be on the bins. Is that correct?
Members of the commission, code enforcement actually does not have the authority to enforce state law. The enforcement of state law rests with agents or officers that are certified by the state of Arizona as police officers.
Thank you. So if there's interest on our part to, at least where the city enforces that it states that this is a nonprofit bin or a profit bin, and no more than that, then it sounds like we do have to add that to the ordinance.
I think we need to be careful that we don't make it so burdensome that legitimate businesses make it difficult for them to do business. We don't want illegitimate businesses in the city, but there is a need or some use for for-profit bins because they do serve some purpose, and in some of them they do donate a percentage to certain charities, and it's up to the property owners. So I think If we want code to make sure that the bins say for profit or not for profit, which is state law, then we should put that in. But I don't know if we should go over and above and write any more into our code based on the difficulty of code enforcement.
Chairman, any other comments?
Yeah, my only comment, I know that last time I spoke about having possibly some link to a website, maybe the city, that could have that information. The people need to fill out this kind of information from each of their entities, and that it would be available, it should be available to the public, that it's something that we might be able to post on a link on a website rather than on the bin itself. But I still agree that we should have a profit or non-profit.
That is certainly an option that the city can look at. The city does have a webmaster that can create a page, and then when a TUP is created, that information would be uploaded.
Yeah, just so that the public wanted to get on the website and look at donation pins, they could find for themselves through linkage, investigate on their own, and then they can go on their own if they want to do further.
Understood, and then the public could actually follow the correct procedure by going through the state and
right.
reporting that incident. Staff understands.
Okay. But I don't want to make that part of this.
No, understood, but you know, since I'm the one with the versions, I'd like to just kind of clarify what we are getting down to. And from my understanding, the commission is leaning towards version C with section 9, including the notarization.
No, I think it's version B.
B?
With the addition of or authorized agent.
With including the authorized agent. Okay. And then I'd also like to point out that with this, we would also have to have all versions on the sheet that was given to you before the meeting about where these are located, because that varies from what was put on the public website.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Okay. The sheet that I put before you, it is the administrative changes that have happened since we distributed the documents. We didn't want to come from two different documents and have that, so simplified it on this. So when we call to the recommendation to the city, it would include the revision of section F1, and then the revision of B with the authorized agent included.
Okay. Mr. Euler.
Sorry to drag this out, I guess. You know, this is, FS 15-13. It's an ordinance to regulate these donation bins. So basically everything that is inside this is an ordinance, correct?
In this document, yes, sir, this is ordinance.
So it is an ordinance to be the notarization is an ordinance then, under this document.
If you take version B, yes, the notarization is part of the ordinance.
Perfect.
And then from what I understand, with that B, you are adding the authorized agent.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Chapman?
Yes, I wanted to clear up the schools and churches bins that they have. Are we going to omit that and not have anything to say about it, or do they need to follow similar rules as the rest of the city? For example, can they have 10 bins lined up on a parking lot or somewhere on their own property? I don't know. I'm just asking, is it something that we want to address, that they may not be charged, or they may, whatever, but still need to follow the same rules? I'm confused about that.
I understand, Chairman, Commissioner. Yes, through the research of this, there are many versions of this, and there are some municipalities that actually do not require a permit for facilities, but there is and please, legal, correct me if I stray a little far, but there might be a little bit of a slippery slope by putting one organization outside of that. And is that?
If I could jump in, Mr. Chairman, just to add to what Bart added, what Bart had just said, we need to have a rational basis to treat churches or any specific group differently from any other group. So our recommendation would be that we treat churches just like we treat anybody else under this ordinance, and they can follow the same procedures and pay whatever fees the council decides to impose.
It's called in this thing an assembly area, right? Rather than church specifically spelled out.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you may have missed that in your reading.
The thing is that some of them had specifically stated church or schools, or others did not. So I'm asking that question just to clarify that.
Yeah, that's been revised in what is called not church or schools and public facilities, but it's areas of assembly and public facilities, I think, is
that is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Could we have the revised motion that you were working on?
Well, on part of the motion would be to take form. There's so many versions here. I hope that I get this right.
So many opinions. Yes.
That on version B, if we could add the or authorize agent after the property owner.
Section 9.
It would be number 9, and it would be if we added that to the first number 9, that that would provide notarization that could be provided by either the owner or authorized agent of the owner.
That's a motion. Could we have a second?
Excuse me, Chair, would the motion also include the revised language for F1? Donation bins shall be subject to the following requirements that are before you?
Yes.
And then does it also include the change to version B10, that the property owner will control the temporary use permit? As such, the owner or the authorized agent may rescind their authorization by submitting a cancellation request to the city in writing, etc.?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Somebody's keeping track of that. Very confusing. We're calling on a motion.
And I second that clarified motion.
Please vote.
Motion passes with 6 yes votes.
We need to vote on the whole version. We need to vote on the version. We need to vote on the whole thing. We haven't voted on it. We only voted on the amendment.
Okay. Were we just voting on the amendment to that, or were we voting on that with the amended language?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, we can ask Heather to reread it, but it was my understanding that was the motion for the whole thing. If that was not the understanding of the commission, we certainly can revote. But I believe the motion was to approve version B with the amendments.
Correct.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is consideration action on a consolidated plan 2015-2019 for the Community Development Block Grant Program.
Good evening, Chairman Summers, members of the Commission. Tonight's presentation is really a culmination of various meetings that we've been having throughout the last few months. And basically, it's a compilation of the consolidated plan that sets priorities for grant funding for the next 5 years, beginning July 1st, 2016. That's so weird to say. So we're just going to go through a little bit of a brief background having to do with the grant itself, and then we're going to go into the process we took to come to the priorities. First of all, the consolidated plan, again, is a 5-year basic roadmap on what we intend on using this funding for so that we can take a look at it in a comprehensive manner. It's mandated by HUD. It identifies the priorities and, again, 5-year duration. Basically, when using this funding, you want to do one of 3 things. You want to benefit low to moderate income persons, you want to prevent or eliminate slum or blight, or you want to do something that has particular urgency. Generally, that has to do with when you have hurricanes or tornadoes or that sort of thing. So because we don't have any designated slum or blight areas in Surprise, what we'd be looking at more prominently would be benefiting low to moderate income persons. HUD has the basic goal of either providing decent housing, providing a suitable living environment, or expanding economic opportunities. So everything that we're talking about has to fit into one of these categories. We've had a lot of discussion surrounding who's going to benefit from the funding. It'll either be a person who meets the income criteria, an area that meets the income criteria, which right now is only the original town site, or a specific clientele, such as seniors, persons that are homeless, adults with disabilities, and the like. Basically, the way that you can look at this in terms of framework is that you have the consolidated plan, and it's a 5-year plan, and each year we will come to you again to reaffirm what it is that we're going to do in that year. So I see it as the consolidated plan forms a menu, and each year we kind of pull from that menu and we decide what we can do according to A, how feasible it is, B, how relevant it is, and how shovel ready it is, because we do have a time frame that we have to spend this money for under, and so we want to make sure that we're successful and use this funding strategically. This process started back in August, where we kind of put together a very generalized type of survey that kind of said, okay, what kind of public services are needed in the area? What kind of bricks and mortar projects are needed in the area? We talked to some stakeholders, nonprofits. We put it out for residents, and we talked to a lot of staff, just because they are the ones that speak to the public on a daily basis when issues do come up. Very general. So from there, we presented our initial findings to council, and then we updated this survey so that we got more specific information. During that time frame, we also released the public service application in December. That was turned in January, and we came to the commission in February, where the people that were applying gave their presentations, and then there were funding recommendations made by the commission. Today, we want to talk about more of the project recommendations and affirm those public service recommendations, just so that we can forward it as an entire document to council for adoption. We're also currently in a 30-day comment period, so we're going to get any feedback from the community that they might have regarding needs and priorities. We are going to have a workshop and then present the entire plan in April to council for final submittal in May to HUD. The main point in going through that process is because this is a public document. It has to be public that puts the priorities together. It has to be publicly driven. And so we really need to beat in the idea that this was all done through a public hearing process, surveys and all that, just to assure that the people that are benefiting from it are the ones that are setting, those priorities. I know this is a little hard to read, but I know that it was given to you as an attachment to kind of talk a little bit about some initial survey results on that secondary survey that we did. We were really excited. We mailed out 1,000 of them, and we got 180 of them back. And basically, it just continues to reaffirm those things that we had seen in the initial survey, which is the community wants recreation programs, youth, senior, veteran programs. The water system in the original town site is a huge priority, as is flood drain improvements and lighting improvements. We have a little bit of discussion with regard to neighborhood cleanup in the same context of some housing rehabilitation type projects. So that's the way that those are kind of couched. And the big screaming need that always comes out is economic development, and more so job training. So we come to basically the menu, if you will. So what we try to do is that we try to give it the different 5 years. Right now, we know that this next year that would start on July 1st, we actually are going to be receiving $551,309. Of that, we set aside our public service funding amount, our administrative funding amount. So that basically leaves about $358,352 for projects. Now, what I want to explain about this particular graph is the fact that in year 2 to 5, you're going to see the duplication of either water sewer improvements and then the secondary project. The reason we're presenting it this way to you is because the very first year we're going to come out and do a feasibility study. As you are well aware, the water system that is in the original town site does not belong to the city of Surprise. It is actually a utility that is owned by El Mirage, but again, it's Surprise who has to endure if it breaks or there's any misfire, if you will. So in that first year, we want to know what's in the ground, what it's going to take to fix it, if it's even feasible. But we want to be sure that it's on our menu so that if we can do something, we can grab that out, because that is definitely the number one priority of the community. But if we're not shovel ready, we want to be sure that we have a secondary type project that we can pick up on. And for the most part, in year 2 to 5, we're talking building improvements, business development grants, building demolition or anything needed to clean up the community, and OTS lighting, which is another utility, but also requires a feasibility needs assessment. The very first year, we're kind of finishing up this last consolidated plan, so we had drawings made to do some street improvements that include some flood drain improvements in residential areas in the original town site, so that's why you see the street improvements. Secondly, I don't know how privy you are, but or if you've been reading the paper, we have a new department called Human Service and Community Vitality. And as part of that, we've actually all been consolidated in the senior center. And so we have a lot more traffic now at the senior center and have become aware of how the situation is in dire need of some ADA accessibility. There's some lack of handicap parking that's required, and we need to get rid of some trip hazards. So we put that in as a high priority for this first year. Now, we also receive home funding through a consortium that we are a part of with the county, because you have to be over, I think it's like 250,000 people in population. And so as a singular city, we don't qualify. So basically what we did is we formed this consortium so that we could meet that threshold. And as a consortium of 8 cities, we all are able to receive that money and divvy it up amongst ourselves. So that's why you see on the right-hand side, we're going to get home funding of about $150,000 a year. 120,000 a year, sorry. And we're going to do rehabilitation projects. I put this on as a side note that yes, we continue to do housing projects, but the process to receive that money is actually a sole and separate consolidated plan process through the county. But I want to make you aware of the grant funding received and the needs that we're going to be meeting. So that's basically the consolidated plan. I'll go back to that main one. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding the priorities and the process that we went through to get there.
Mr. Prevey? Mr. Smith?
No questions.
Mr. Chapman?
No questions.
Mr. Hoyler?
No questions.
No questions.
And I have no questions. Could we have a motion, please?
I move to recommend approval to the Mayor and City Council the Consolidated Plan 2015 to 2019 for the Community Development Block Grant Program.
Second.
Please vote.
Motion passes, 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Next item is the companion to that, consideration and action on the 2015-2016 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan Funding Recommendations.
Thank you. Chairman Summers, members of the commission. Again, this is the secondary part. Basically, we're just reaffirming what it is that the city is going to submit for in this year's annual action plan. Just more specifically, and you've heard it before, the public service grant timeline basically started in December. We did an application review in January, an evaluation where it came to the commission for recommendation hearing. And it's part of the council, it's part of the comment period, and it will go to council also. That's part of the entire process. Next time I'll tell my staff not to put all of these wonderful. There we go. Okay. So just to give a little bit of background, just to look back at the prior 5 years, what we've completed and accomplished. Through the last 5 years, through public services, we have been able to help St. Mary's Food Bank for over $118,000, Benavia for about $69,000, Arizona Charter Academy for $48,000, Arizona Bridge to Independent Living for modifications of $34,000. The City of Surprise received funding for the Summer Youth Employment Program, and we have been able to give some funding for emergency shelter to the CAS, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. Also, right now, you might remember talking about improvements to Bicentennial Park. We just demolished the building that you're seeing now, which has been a huge eyesore and blight in the community. We've been able to complete, I would say, right around 100 rehabilitations of homes, emergency rehabilitation that has to do with heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing. So we were able to get rid of a lot of trip hazards, make things more ADA accessible. And right now, again, we're going to be completing the 2 road reconstructions, and we did the drawings for a 3rd. So we can be very proud of the work that we've done in the last 5 years. Starting this next 5 years, per your recommendations, we are setting aside funding for ABLE, ASK, Arizona Charter Academy, Benavia, CAS, Tumbleweed, SYEP, and St. Mary's Food Bank. The way that, as presented before, we're looking at the water feasibility study, the street improvements, senior center parking improvements, and then to that we would add the administrative portion and the public service portion, as previously noted, for a grand total of $551,309. Any questions?
Mr. Chapman.
No questions.
Mr. Euler.
No questions.
Mr. Keating.
No questions.
Brady.
No questions.
Mr. Smith.
No questions.
And I have no questions. Could we have a motion, please?
I move to approve the 2015-2016 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan funding recommendations.
Second.
Please vote.
Motion passes, 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Our last item is if anybody wants to add anything for a future agenda item. Seeing none, I call this meeting adjourned.